Okay, sure. This is much more difficult.
Typical student eating right classes.
Yeah, I think Kate's coming. Two of us can't participate. It has been events for 10 days, so we have 6. 5, 6. Such is life. Amendment to the Open Public Meetings Act.
Here.
Mrs. Gerazzi,
Here.
Dr. Lamont, Mr. Leppert,
Here.
Judge Parker,
Here.
Mr. Perez,
Here.
Mr. Scanlon,
Here.
Mrs. Yaskovic,
Yaskovic, here. Sorry, that's okay.
Mr. Gavin,
Here.
Dr. Mazur, and Mr. Duffy.
Here.
Pledge of Allegiance, please, you all stand and join me. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everybody on our special day. In light of the part of the subject matter that's going to be addressed today, I'm going to step down as chair and turn the chair over to the vice chairwoman.
Thank you, Glenn. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have ordinarily in our meetings, the next item on our agenda would be courtesy of the floor on matters on the agenda. We are going to ask that that be postponed until after the delivery of the report, and then we will open the floor for any comments for anyone that wishes to make some. In the meantime, we're going to go forward with the report of the nominating committee.
Oh, we're doing the nominating committee now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Kate has been nominated for the secretary position.
Okay, are we, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Kate, Lazar, you, Paul, will you take care of that for us, please?
Would you? Let me just, by way of introduction, talk a little bit about the accrediting body and so on. One of the things that board members need to know is the complexity of the environment in which I work in. You know, it's not just about law and financial matters and stuff like that. It's also about regulation and about accreditation. And the accrediting bodies cover all of the things that we have to do as board members and as and in the administration. There are 14 standards currently in the accrediting, in the Middle States accrediting booklet. That's going to be changing. They're narrowing it down to 7 standards that are going to be more clearly written, and expectations are going to be more clear. But in any event, the way it works is that every 10 years, the college has to submit a self-study report. And the self-study report is done internally. It usually takes a year, sometimes 2 years, to actually put that report together. And you have to involve every member of the campus on it in one way or another through that process. And then the accrediting body sends out a team of usually about 5 people to investigate the college from the standpoint of the accrediting body. And the importance of this is that the accrediting bodies are voluntary organizations. Every college actually pays dues to one of the 6 regional accrediting bodies. And the dues is based on the budget that you have. Our dues is somewhere around $5,000, I believe, a little more than $5,000. And what that does is the accrediting body is licensed by the nation. If you don't have financial aid, you're not going to have a college, is what it amounts to. So the accrediting bodies have real power. And I've actually been at a college where we were put on probation for non-compliance of one or the other of the standards. Then in the 5th year following the full-blown decennial study, there is a periodic review report that was due. And last year we submitted the periodic review for the 5-year period. And in that report, you're supposed to explain the deficiencies that they found in the previous 10-year report, and also explain any changes that have taken place at the college beforehand. So what happened this time was that we delivered the PRR and the periodic review report, and the changes had a lot to do with the finances. The financial condition of the college had deteriorated initially because of circumstances that occurred before I came into office. There had been a little progress on assessment and on institutional assessment, and there were some questions about general education. So the PRR focused on those issues, and we submitted the report, and they assigned those to reviewers who do not come on campus. Those reviewers visited that report, sent us their recommendations, and their recommendations were actually pretty positive. They thought we had, in fact, we were commended for the writing of the report and the comprehensiveness of the report that we submitted. But when it got to the board of Middle States, the full board decided that they needed to have special monitoring of the college because of the recent troubles that we had. And the special monitoring involved 4 issues: institutional resources, that is our financial situation; institutional research; general education; assessment; student learning. And so we were tasked with coming up with a monitoring report, which is due actually this Wednesday now. And it's due September 1st, but in order to get it in on time, we have to submit it on Wednesday, and or on Thursday. And we were also told that they're going to send a visiting team to check up on us with regard to the monitoring report. And that visiting team is coming on October 13th and 14th, and we'll be here for that. I wasn't initially worried about the institutional resources, because at the time that we submitted the periodic review, we had had the one bad audit from the first year, and we only had the approved good audit from the second year. Since that time, we have a second good audit, and I'm fully expecting we're going to have a good audit this time coming up. So we have 3 good audits now. And I think that they were concerned about the money that we had in reserve, or a cash on hand, and they were concerned about our I keep forgetting the name, our ratio. Current ratio. And in both of those, we meet the standards that they set out. We think we meet them, and so we'll see about that. We have had to beef up our assessment of student learning. This is something that has been all the accrediting bodies have been pushed by the national level to have assessment of student learning, and most community colleges, when they get dinged by their accrediting body, it actually is on this issue. So we've had to beef that up. We're in the process of hiring an assistant dean for coordinating assessment, and we actually do have some good results already that we're going to be able to show, and I think we're there. And then I think on the other kinds of things, on general education, I think we're covered by the state standards that we have, and some other things that we're able to do around that. So I think all in all, we're standing pretty good right now in light of the trials and tribulations that we've had about it. Just one other general comment. These are only 4 of the standards. And the other standards involve governance, how we operate, and so on. In general, there's not supposed to be outside interference at the college. The colleges have to be independent. There needs to be a certain distance between the board and the administration, and it's all laid out. The new standards actually lay it out much more clearly than the current standards do, and we expect the new standards to be approved this coming fall, region-wide for that. So that's where we are. What I'm asking the board to do is to approve this document for submission so that we can get it in this week. And we're able to point out that the board saw this document, which is why we sent it out in advance, so you can have an opportunity to take a look at it yourselves. It is the typical kind of way in which we write a document, and that is that you put in some of the background since the last report was submitted, and any changes and so on. We've included some of those kinds of things, as well as answering the issues that were raised with respect to the 4 things that they're looking at. So I'm asking the board to approve this for submission.
Do we have a motion?
Second.
Any discussion? Bernie?
I just wanted to indicate that I had a chance to work with the committee on the periodic review when that was submitted by the college. It's important for the board members when you have a chance to really take a look at this document because it gives you a concise overview and summary of what we're about and what we're going to be doing in the future in terms of assessment of student progress, the standards that the college has to meet. So it's worthwhile to really revisit this document. There's a lot of work that goes into this from the committee standpoint, so I asked Vice President Waite to indicate, and he gave me the list, but I'll let him identify those members who were integral part in putting this together. Sometimes you don't appreciate how much work goes on in the outside just to get this document together because it has to be factual. There's going to be a follow-up visit, so it involves faculty, involves everybody on campus, but there are quite a few people who spent a lot of time and effort to put this together. Bill, can you?
We relied again on Dr. Mary DeHart, who is with us this evening. Mary is a professor in our mathematics department. She pulled the whole thing pretty much together, and I'm also indebted to our new institutional researcher, Corey Homer, who did a lot of terrific work for us getting this set. And Corey, are you here? I can see you, but he's back there, Debbie said. Thank you. And I worked with the core team, and then throughout most of the summer we were working on that. And later I also indebted to our Dean Kathleen McKay and Dean Alberta Jager. Sometimes more eyes on this are very helpful when we're debating about whether to put something in, leave it in, take it out, how to phrase it. So that's essentially the group.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, any further discussion of the report?
I assume, we don't foresee any issues or concerns that will result from the on-site meeting or on-site visit that's going to happen?
No idea.
No idea.
No, we think it will.
It'd be fine.
We hope.
All right, any other questions, discussions, comments? All right, shall we take a roll call vote on that, please?
This is for item 3.2.
Yes.
Dr. Andrews?
Yes.
Mrs. Fox?
Yes.
Mrs. Garachi?
Yes.
Mr. Leppert?
Yes.
Judge Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Scanlon?
Yes.
Mrs. Yaskovic? Mr. Gavin?
Yes, for the back of the room.
All right, very well. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, we have a presentation of the Saiber Law Firm.
Yes, as you know, we've had a lot of controversy over a couple of issues. One dealing with the project, the D building project, the engineering firm that we used, as well as the bidding process that took place, and then subsequently issues relating to the ethics that we had regarding some of the board members. And so in the course of doing business on this, we had the college law firm had a conflict of interest, so we had to go out to conflict counsel. And conflict counsel, there were questions raised about possible conflict there, although in the report you'll see that there wasn't any. But because we wanted to clear the deck, and because there were so many questions that were raised, I went out and hired Saiber law firm and asked them to come in and take a look at all the issues involved. And the law firm that we hired has as its lawyers Bill Maderer and Rob Nussbaum. Bill is, I don't know Rob's background as much as I know Bill's, but Bill had been a former U.S. attorney, has done these investigations before, and Saiber itself has done investigations for Princeton, Rutgers, and other universities, so they're very familiar with the institutions that they're dealing with. Very reputable law firm, and I will turn it over to them to make their presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. My name is Bill Maderer. I am the managing partner of the Saiber Law Firm. We have about 65 or 70 attorneys, mainly located in Florham Park, also in Newark. And as Dr. Mazur said, we have been involved with doing internal investigations, not only for colleges and universities, but for private institutions as well. Private companies also have problems that require investigations, not just colleges and universities, and this institution, like many others, whether it be Rutgers, Princeton, or others, sometimes need to bring in an outside firm to get an independent view of the facts and what happened in a given situation. So when we're asked to do an investigation of this type, there are really three things we do. We try to identify each and every witness who might have relevant knowledge, and we interview that person either in person or on the telephone. Second, we try to gather all relevant documentation. In this case, there was a fair amount of it dealing with the bidding process and related matters. And third, we look to see if there are any applicable laws, statutes, or regulations which impact upon the issue at hand. And of course, we did all of those in this particular matter. What we were asked to do today, this afternoon, was to give a brief summary of the written report, which was transferred to the university late last week, and as I understand it, circulated to the members of the board and to the media in recent days. That report also, as I understand it, is available online on the college's website. So on the one hand, this is going to take 15 or 20 minutes, and for some of you it may be a little too detailed, and for others who don't have the familiarity, you may be looking for more detail, and you can go online to get that. In addition to the report, we have a dozen or so exhibits to the report, which are also available. As I assume most of you know, in about March of this year, the college advertised a notice of bidders in various newspapers in the state in order to solicit bids for the renovation of a particular building on campus known as Building D, and that was known as the Building D Architectural HVAC Improvements Project. The bid specifications were prepared by a professional engineering firm known as CP Engineers and Architecture. That firm had previously prepared on a pro bono non-fee basis a campus master plan for the college. Sealed bids were originally asked to be submitted in April. That was ultimately adjourned to Friday, May 23rd, which coincidentally was the day before Memorial Day. 14 bid packages were either picked up or FedEx to interested contractors. And the college on the bid opening date of May 23rd only received one bid. So out of the 14 individuals or contractors who at least expressed some initial interest, one company known as Echelon LLC picked up the bid and actually bid on the project. The amount of the bid was a little over $2.8 million. That was about $850,000 more than the initial estimate or the revised estimate by CP engineers, which, as we have all known when we've done renovations on a house, is only an estimate until you get actually contractors bidding on the project. That bid estimate was not public, so when Echelon bid, they just bid based upon what they felt was the number that they could do the project for and presumably make a profit in the process. The bid came in on that Friday. Over the weekend, CP engineers reviewed that bid and spoke to the principal of Echelon, a gentleman by the name of Jason Colano. On Tuesday, that's the day after Memorial Day, CP reported to the college that they had reviewed the bid and spoken to Mr. Colano and felt that the bid was responsive to the contract. They also reviewed why the bid ultimately was approximately $850,000 higher than their original estimate. On that Tuesday, the Board of Trustees voted 7-1 in favor of awarding the project to Echelon. Shortly after the trustees' vote awarding the contract to Echelon, as Dr. Mazur said, a number of questions were raised concerning the bidding process, the fact that there was only a sole bidder, and ultimately issues were raised concerning potential conflicts of interest among 3 different members of the Board of Trustees. Along the way, starting in late June, our firm was asked to review each of those issues. The relationship of the members of the Board of Trustees dealt with the issue of whether any of them had personal or business relationships with CP, the engineering firm, not Echelon, CP, to affect or might potentially affect their vote on any of the CP contracts. We were contacted, as I say, in late June. Here we are in late August, so it's been about 60 days plus or minus. Throw in a couple of vacations in there, and that's what we've done to try to complete this project, this investigation, in a timely fashion. So I said before, what we wanted to do is look to see who had relevant knowledge, who had relevant information, and we would meet with them in person or on the telephone. In that regard, we spoke to approximately 25 different individuals. Among the people we spoke with and interviewed were Dr. Mazur, Frank Musella, who was Vice President of Finance and Operations, Heather Gallagher, who was Director of Purchasing here at the college, Jason Colano, who was the owner of Echelon, Stanley Pusez, who's the managing member of the CP engineering firm, 3 members of the Board of Trustees whose relationship with CP was at issue, Chairman Glenn Gavin, Ed Leppert, and Glenn Vetrano, who has since resigned from the board. We also spoke with Judge Parker. We spoke to an individual who owned another company called T.M. Brennan Contractors. Thomas Brennan is the owner of that company. I'll explain how that relates in a few moments. We spoke to the board's attorney, John Urson. We spoke to Michael Salvaggi of the Porter Covert Cone law firm. We spoke to Sussex County Counsel, Dennis McConnell. And we spoke to or Hella Gallagher had called beforehand, almost all of the other individual companies that had picked up the bid but chose not to bid on the project. I said there were 14, a couple of them were journals that just advertised bids, so you don't interview those people. There were about 12 less, I think out of the 12, putting aside Jason Colano, we interviewed, spoke to on the phone about 9 out of that, 8 or 9 of the rest of them. So what we did was interview on the phone or in person everybody who we felt had specific and relevant knowledge. We reviewed a whole bunch of documents. I won't bore you with all of them. Among the documents we reviewed were the bid specifications that had been prepared for the project by CP. We reviewed documents provided by the college to the Board of School estimate. We obviously reviewed Echelon's bid package, bid bond, and pre-qualification documents. We reviewed Jason Colano's CV, curriculum vitae. There were corporate records of Echelon that were available on the web. We reviewed those from Thomson Reuters and other sources. We reviewed letters from Michael Salvaggi of the Porter Colbert Cohn law firm related to this project. We asked for documents from CP, and they provided those documents to us for our review. We reviewed relevant minutes of the Board of Trustees that voted on these various projects, and other documents that were relevant to the decision both to hire CP in connection with this project, as well as the bidding and decision-making process in voting to award the contract to Echelon. But now we're going to go through, that's the background, we're now going to go through specific questions that were raised, what we did in connection with those questions, what our findings were, and in some cases what our recommendations are. So Rob?
First issue that we looked at was the question of whether the notice to bidders and the addenda that followed the notice to bidders was properly advertised. And to come back with an answer to that question, we spoke with Heather Gallagher, we reviewed the addenda, we reviewed the notice to bidders, we reviewed the advertisements in the Ledger and in the New Jersey Herald, and we reviewed the New Jersey County Contracts Law. And what we found was that the County College Contracts Law sets forth procedures for the publication of advertisements for the notice of bidders as well as revisions and addenda. The statute provides that the notice to bidders has to be advertised sufficiently in advance of the bid due date in order to foster competitive bidding, and it has to be published at least 10 days prior to the time when the bids are going to be received. The revisions and addenda, on the other hand, have to be published in a paper in the county, and it was done in the Herald and in the Star Ledger as well, at least 7 days prior to the bid due date. But for the 7 days, you don't count Saturdays, holidays, and Sundays. What we found was that the notice to bidders and all addenda were advertised by Heather Gallagher, the college's director of purchasing, in a manner consistent with the time requirements of the New Jersey County College Contracts Law, and therefore we concluded that the college did properly advertise the notice to bidders as well as the 4 addenda that followed from the notice to bidders. The next question that we encountered was one that was raised as to whether the college followed proper procedures for evaluating the sole bid when that bid came in. And in order to answer that, again, we reviewed the County College Contracts Law, and we spoke with Ms. Gallagher, the Director of Purchasing. And what we found when we looked at that question was that the County College Contracts Law did not set forth any procedures for how to evaluate bids. The only thing that the County College Contracts Law really did that applied was it required the publication of the notice to bidders and the addenda that we just discussed, as well as requiring that the contract be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. We spoke with Ms. Gallagher and found that she had an internal procedure that she followed when she would receive bids for other projects, including this one. And her procedures including reviewing bids for accuracy, ensuring that all the required documents from the bid were supplied by the bid person or the company that was submitting the bid. She verified the certifications made by the company or companies that would submit bids. She would check to see if any of them were debarred by the Department of Labor, and she would check their references. And what we concluded was that in the absence of any procedures established by the New Jersey County College Contracts Law or any regulations, that the procedures that she followed, which I just outlined, for evaluating bids were reasonable and appropriate. However, we recommended that the college adopt a formal protocol including a checklist of these procedures. So when bids come in, there's a checklist that says this was done, this was done, this was done, where there's no procedures set forth by a statute or regulation. At our recommendation, Ms. Gallagher put together such a protocol, and that's attached as one of the exhibits, I believe Exhibit O, in the report that we submitted to the college.
We're doing a little tag team here, as you can see. Thought it'd be a little more interesting. So one of the main questions asked was, how come 14 people or 14 entities picked up these bid packages and only one company actually submitted a bid. And the related question was, why was the bid package picked up in the name of T.M. Brennan Contractors, but the bid was submitted in the name of Echelon? Needless to say, we spoke to everybody involved, Mr. Colano, Mr. Brennan, and the other bidders who did not, the other bid holders who did not actually submit a bid. And as I say, we ultimately got about 10 out of the 12 or so that were in that category. What were the reasons why other contractors didn't bid? Well, everybody had a reason. Some of them were the same reason. Contractors were preparing bids for other projects and could not submit a bid for this one in connection with the project time that was required by the contract. Remember, the idea was to have this project completed so the building could be functional again by the spring semester 2015. It was a tight schedule because the work had started as of June. Others said they didn't want to travel to Sussex County. One of the bid holders that actually picked up the package, as I recall, had a business in Ocean County, and we're up here in Sussex County, so that was one reason. Others said they were committed to other projects at the time, and they felt they were too busy. So, based on our prior experience, it's not unusual for contractors to pick up bid packages, evaluate it, and decide it's not for them and move on. Jason Colano of Echelon was working at the college on an unrelated project for Brennan at the time. He thought Brennan might be interested in this project. Colano not only had his own company, Echelon, but he also did project work for Brennan. And so he picked up the bid in the name of Brennan. As it turns out, Brennan was not interested, decided not to bid on the project, and Echelon decided to bid on the project in its own name. So we have various reasons why other bidders, other bid holders ultimately decided not to bid on the project. It's clear that Colano obtained the bid package in the name of Brennan, and there was nothing untoward that we found that suggested that he picked up in one name and submitted it in his name, because Brennan has told us he was not interested in this particular project. That's why there was one bidder for the project. Question is, was Echelon really the lowest responsible bidder? Question is, since his bid came in approximately $850,000 higher than the estimate by CP, was anything improper in that regard? Again, we reviewed appropriate documents, the law, interviewed appropriate people. What did we find? First of all, we sat down with Jason Colano in this room for about 2 hours. We learned that he has a degree from Virginia Tech University in electrical and computer engineering. He's worked for many years for T.M. Brennan as a project manager and cost estimator. That Echelon is pre-qualified by the state of New Jersey in general construction, HVAC, and mechanical sheet metal work. Echelon is bonded by an A-rated insurance company, and they've worked on many other publicly bid construction projects as a general contractor or subcontractor. Again, we found nothing wrong with its qualifications or his background or his experience. So we concluded that Echelon indeed was the lowest responsible bidder, indeed the only lowest responsible bidder for this particular contract.
The statute requires the contract to be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder, which Bill just went over. But we took it to the next level to decide whether, in light of the CP estimate, which was $850,000 below the Echelon bid, to determine whether Echelon's bid was a reasonable bid. And to do that, we interviewed Jason Colano, we spoke with Stan Push from CP Engineers, and then we engaged the services of a neutral independent engineer from Cedar Knolls, New Jersey, a gentleman named Russell Berner, who has a company that does engineering work and forensic engineering investigations called Construction Claims Group. And we provided Mr. Berner with whatever documentation he needed, including Echelon's bid, the bid specifications that CP had prepared, and any other correspondence that he wanted. and he prepared a report that was issued to us back on July 31st. And he found that Echelon's bid was in fact reasonable, and he gave several reasons for reaching that conclusion. He found that the CP estimate, which came in at $2.1 million versus Echelon's bid, which was in excess of $2.8 million, did not include adequate costs for Building D work, which included more than just buying new windows and installing them. There were other costs that the contractor would have to incur for temporary facilities, brick masonry repairs, brick masonry shoring. There was an issue regarding contaminated caulk that might have had asbestos in it, which required special care and treatment. And each of these windows in Building D required some degree or level of custom work. And the contractor, Echelon, was in a better position to evaluate those costs than CP as an engineering firm would, because the engineering firm is looking at it from an engineering perspective as opposed to a perspective that a general contractor would look at. So Russ Berner found that Echelon taking into the consideration those additional costs and factoring them into its bid was reasonable. Construction Claims Group also found that CP's estimate did not consider the risk of additional cracks developing in the facade during demolition and during the work that Echelon was doing, and which under the contract documents, Echelon as the contractor would still have the obligation to address. So the contractor built into his estimate the risk that he was going to have to do this undetermined amount of work based on what could happen based on the age of this building from the 1930s, which would then have to be addressed at his expense and at his time pursuant to the contract. And finally, the CP estimate did not take into account the risk that the HVAC work was going to entail at Building D. Part of the HVAC work involved installing what's called a condensate line, which you might be able to route it easily in a new building when you have nothing obstructing you, but in a renovation, you can encounter a lot of unforeseen circumstances, and therefore the cost that the builder, Echelon, built into its bid took into account that you might have to reroute things or encounter obstacles that will have to be dealt with. Unknown obstacles often occur during renovations as opposed to new construction. This was an old renovation dating back to the 1930s, so there was a lot of risk. And based on those three factors that I just outlined, Construction Claims Group found that notwithstanding the fact that Echelon's bid was $850,000 higher than the CP estimate, the bid was still reasonable. And that's what the main thrust of this analysis was. Is the bid reasonable, as opposed to was he just padding the costs because he was not expecting to get the bid, or because he just wanted to make as much money as he could. The engineer was a neutral, independent investigator who looked at the bid package and the bid and found that these costs were reasonable. Interestingly, when we met in this room with Stan from CP, and we spent almost 3 hours with him here, he found that he could not vouch for the reasonableness of the costs that Echelon attributed to these items, but he found no problem at all with the approach Echelon took to addressing these issues, which CP admitted that it did not recognize when it was putting together its bid specification and estimate.
As I said about 15 minutes ago, the bids were received, or the loan bid was received on a Friday before Memorial Day, before the 3-day Memorial Day weekend. They were opened and evaluated by CP over the weekend, and the board had a meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday, essentially the first working day after the Memorial Day weekend. And an issue was raised as to whether there was sufficient time for members of the board to review the bid, review the evaluation CP had done, and make a reasoned decision and vote on that project. We obviously interviewed the people at issue, including 4 or 5 members of the Board of Trustees. We learned certainly that Building D is the main classroom building at the college. It also houses the student center and cafeteria. The college wanted this project completed by the spring semester, so they would only have 1 semester where classroom and other facilities had to be moved to another location. achieving that goal would require the contract to be not only voted on and signed, but work started during the summer months as soon as possible. And our review of this particular issue leads us to believe that, number one, the college and the Board of Trustees certainly had legitimate reasons to review this bid and vote on it in the expedited manner that it did. Although in hindsight, perhaps if they had waited another week to vote on it and allow everyone a fuller opportunity to review all of the documents of all of the members and answer all of the questions, perhaps that would have been better, at least for some people who needed more time or desired more time. That being said, in the entire bidding process and review process, we again found nothing improper that was done.
I'm going to do the next two questions. The next question that we faced stemmed from the fact that the board voted 7-1 to approve the contract with Echelon. Thereafter, Echelon submitted a signed contract for doing that work, and that contract has not yet been signed by the college. So we were asked to look at whether Echelon has a claim for damages against the college if the college does not execute the contract which was awarded to Echelon by the board back on May 27th. And we spoke with various people at the college. We spoke with Jason Colano. We reviewed the AIA document, which is called AIA, it's the A101-207, 2007 agreement between an owner and contractor where the basis of payment is a stipulated sum. That was a document that Jason Colano signed on behalf of Echelon and sent it to the college, and the college did not act on that yet. So we found that even though the college has not signed it, Mr. Colano did agree to extend the time by 60 days to allow the college time to go through this process that we're discussing today, and then decide whether it's going to sign that contract or not. So, and that 60 days runs out on September 19th. We concluded that because Echelon was the lowest responsible bidder for Building D, and that Russ Berner from Construction Claims Group had found that his bid was reasonable, we recommended that the college should execute the contract with Echelon, or if it opts not to execute that contract, the college does face a potential damages claim if Mr. Colano were to file a legal claim, a lawsuit against the college, if he can then demonstrate that he has sustained losses as a result of the college not executing that contract. And those losses are speculative right now, but they could include the costs he incurred in posting a performance bond or a bid bond, if he gave up opportunities to perform other work because he anticipated performing the work for this project. His damages would be the lost profit that he could have earned on those other jobs. It could be a lot of money. So there is the potential if he were to file a lawsuit, but it would be his burden of proof to establish what those damages are. The next issue that we looked at was the one that Dr. Mazur alluded to when he was speaking to introduce us, and that was whether the Porter, Covert, and Cohen firm had a conflict of interest when the college asked Porter Covert to evaluate Echelon's bid last June because one of its former associates, John Urson, had previously formed Echelon as an LLC for Jason Colano when Mr. Urson worked as an associate at the Porter Covert firm. And I spoke with Mr. Selvaggi from the Porter Covert firm. He's the one who issued the 2 letters in May dealing with his evaluation of Echelon and its bid. I also spoke with Mr. Urson, and we looked at the New Jersey Rules of Professional Conduct. And what we found was that Mr. Urson was an associate at the Porter, Covert, and Cohen firm. While he was an associate at that firm, he did in fact form Echelon as an LLC for Jason Colano in May of 2008. Mr. Urson left that firm and went to another firm in January of 2013, and he took Echelon with him as a client because he has since done more work for Echelon. But between May 2008 and June 2014, between the time that he formed Echelon while at Porter Coburg and by the time the college asked Mr. Selvaggi at Porter Coburg to evaluate Echelon's bid in June of this year, Porter Coburg had performed no legal work for Echelon or Jason Colano in that 6-year period. So therefore, looking at the New Jersey rules for professional conduct, we concluded that neither Mr. Selvaggi nor his firm had a conflict of interest which would have precluded them from doing their review of the Echelon bid in June of 2014.
We're nearing the end. I know it's getting a little warm in here. I hope it's not the subject matter, but just the outdoor temperature. The last general topic that we're going to deal with is whether any of the college's members of the Board of Trustees should have disclosed a business or personal relationship with CP Engineers when CP voted on matters relating to hiring CP and payments to CP. Now, you recall CP is the engineering firm. The contract that was voted on in late May after Memorial Day was the contract with Echelon. The focus of this inquiry dealt with the relationship of 3 members of the board with CP. A related issue to that is whether there was a sufficient quorum, i.e. the number of people who were present and voting, at 2 meetings at which the board voted certain contracts with CP. The reason for that is if a member has a member of the board has a conflict of interest, that member not only shouldn't be voting, but also cannot be counted as part of a quorum. Similar to the other issues that we discussed, we interviewed the appropriate people, including the members of the Board of Trustees, and we reviewed the relevant documentation, including the college's then existing and present ethics policy. I'd like to discuss each one individually. The first person is the chairman of the board, Glenn Gavin. We learned that CP became a client of Mr. Gavin's former law firm and then of Mr. Gavin in April of 2013. Mr. Gavin at some point leased space in a building occupied by CP and owned by a company related to CP. Certain board members knew Mr. Gavin represented CP, and it was commonly known that he and CP each leased space in the same building. Mr. Gavin voted in favor of approving CP's proposal to prepare the campus master plan for the college in March 2013. That was the master plan which cost the college no money. It was done, as we say, pro bono by the CP engineering firm. Mr. Gavin then abstained on all of the votes relating to CP that came before the board. So the subsequent contracts, including the engineering contracts related to the awarding of the contract of Building D, any of those contracts in which CP was going to be compensated for the work they did, Mr. Gavin abstained on that. He did not vote. Mr. Edward Leppert was also another trustee who we were asked to look at his relationship with CP. Mr. Leppert is an accountant, CPA, and also owns a payroll servicing company called ProPay. CP began using ProPay for his payroll needs, similar to ADP that many of us are familiar with, in 2012, and pays ProPay about $2,000 a year to provide those payroll servicing, those payroll services. In May of this year, CP asked Mr. Leppert's accounting firm to submit a proposal to perform general accounting services. To our knowledge, no written agreement has occurred in connection with that, and as of the date, at least of our interview with Mr. Leppert, no services have been provided. Prior to voting on CP's proposal to prepare the master plan, Mr. Leppert inquired of the board's counsel, Mr. Urson, Rob spoke earlier, as to whether he had a conflict of interest with regard to matters relating to CP, i.e. did Mr. Leppert, because of this relatively minor relationship where CP used his payroll services, whether that would bar him from voting on matters dealing with CP. And he, Mr. Leppert, to his credit, inquired of the board's counsel as to whether such a conflict existed. Based on that discussion, Mr. Leppert did not believe that he had a conflict with matters, regard to matters relating to CP that came before the Board of Trustees. And certain other members of the board, as well as Dr. Mazur, were aware of the CP pro pay relationship. Mr. Leppert abstained initially on 2 votes relating to CP, one because it occurred prior to the time he had spoken to Mr. Urson, and subsequently because he did not have time to review the materials that were being voted on. He then voted in favor of all of the matters awarding contracts or monetary payments to CP because in good faith he believed he did not have a conflict of interest. The third individual, Glenn Vitrano, Mr. Vitrano has since resigned from the board in July of this year. Mr. Vitrano had a long-standing personal relationship with one of CP's principals, Stanley Poosh. CP asked Mr. Vitrano to become a paid advisor to CP in March of 2012 and paid Mr. Vitrano $500 bi-weekly for his advice and services, about $13,000 a year. CP also provided Mr. Vitrano with a business card, which he showed to us, to evidence his affiliation with CP. At no time, as far as we know, in talking to Mr. Vitrano and the members of the board, were any member of the board or at the college aware that he was a paid advisor to CP. Mr. Vitrano, however, abstained on all votes relating to CP that came before the Board of Trustees, with the exception of one particular vote involving a contract worth about $143,000 that ultimately was awarded to CP. When we spoke to Mr. Vitrano here in this room about a month ago, he admitted that was a mistake. He's not sure why he did it, and he even thought about letting everybody know at that point in time, but the matter had already been voted on and approved, so he didn't say anything. So that's Mr. Gavin and Mr. Leppert and Mr. Vitrano. So where do we come out on this ethics issue? We looked at the college's current ethics policy. We believe that it is currently written, it is inadequate, and doesn't cover all of the issues. We believe it should be revised to be consistent with the code of ethics required by New Jersey law for nonprofit institutions. We believe that these 3 trustees should have formally disclosed their business and or personal relationships with CP Engineering. As I said a minute ago, some of these relationships were known to certain members of the board and certain, and to Dr. Mazur in one particular case, but they were not formally presented in open session, so they were put on the record. And they should have so disclosed it and abstained from all votes or participation in those votes in connection with any votes dealing with CP contracts. We did find, however, that New Jersey law provides that if transactions are voted on by members of a board where there are conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest, that the vote itself does not have to be voided. However, what would happen was that the matter at issue, i.e. the contracts with CP, would have to be evaluated by an independent person or entity to determine whether those contracts were fair. Put it in simple terms, if the contract for $100,000 was voted on and the participation of certain members who had a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest were taken into consideration as part of that vote, an outside entity would have to determine whether that $100,000 contract was a fair price for the services to be rendered. If the outside firm determined that the fair price was $60,000, there might be an issue because the 100 is greater than 60. On the other hand, if the fair price was 150, then the school would have gotten a bargain and you shut your mouth and move on. So in this case, we were asked by the college to engage the same construction firm, Rush Berner, who is the independent engineer, to review each of the CP contracts to determine whether the prices and the amounts agreed to by the college with CP was fair in light of the services to be provided. And Mr. Berner provided such a fairness opinion. It's included as an exhibit to our report, and it's available. The fairness opinion was issued on August 21st, just last week, and it found that all of CP's proposals and contracts were in fact fairly priced. At this point, the board may consider this fairness opinion and ratify the prior votes in favor of CP at a subsequent meeting. That obviously does not include the votes of any trustees whose personal or business relationship with CP would create a conflict of interest. In connection with at least two of those, in connection with two of those votes, we also found that a quorum was not in existence because if you eliminate the individuals who have a conflict of interest, there were insufficient number of members of the board present at the meeting to constitute a quorum. In general, a quorum is, if there are 10 members on the board who are present, it would be 6, but you can't include the members who have a conflict of interest. So on March 26, 2013 and December 13, 2013, we found that an insufficient quorum existed, and those votes in connection with the CP contracts would be re-voted without the board members to make sure that a quorum was present anytime a new vote ratifying the prior CP contracts was had. It's not a separate vote. Obviously, any vote on any matter before this board has to have a sufficient quorum. As it turns out, two of the votes related to CP have to be redone because of the quorum issue, but all the votes would have to be redone to the extent any of the board members had a conflict of interest, which would impair their ability to be counted. So what we did in terms of that is we provided, at the college's request, a revised and much more comprehensive ethics policy that's also included as an exhibit to the report for the board's consideration, so that moving forward, both the board members and individually and the board and the public in general will know exactly what the responsibilities and obligations are for each of the board members. And I think it's fair to say that in speaking to the board members previously, not everyone appreciated what their obligations were for full disclosure and abstention in connection with their relationships with CP. Dr. Mazur, that concludes our not too brief oral report.
Listen, I want to thank you all very much. I think it's you get a chance to read the report. Those who haven't read it, it is online. It is a comprehensive and review of all the issues that were raised during the process here. And so we thank you for that report.
Do we have a motion to acknowledge receipt of the report?
So moved.
Second. I'll second.
All right, the motion's been moved and seconded. Do we have discussion? Having no discussion.
Just have 2 points of clarification with respect to the prior votes that you're recommending that we redo in effect. If we choose not to do that, what is the consequence? And related to that, if we revote those votes and the motions don't carry, what is the consequence of that?
Well, number one, as to 2 votes, there's not a technical quorum present. So as to those 2 votes, we would strongly recommend that those contracts with CEP be revoted on. As to the other ones that don't involve a quorum, we also strongly recommend that there be a revote so that the board will have a written memorialization that nobody who had a conflict of interest or apparent or potential conflict of interest participated or voted on that vote. I don't know what the consequences would be, except that theoretically another engineering firm could come in and say that the contracts previously awarded to CP, some of which are still in the process of being fulfilled, were not legitimate because there was not an adequate and sufficient vote by members of the board. That's an off-the-cuff response, not a detailed analytical response, but that's my feeling on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Any questions, comments? All right. We're not calling for the public just yet. This is among the board members.
Are we also discussing where we go from here, or is this just specifically?
The motion on the floor is to acknowledge and accept the report. Acknowledge receipt of the report.
Well, I'll take this opportunity then, if I may, Madam Chair, to make a couple of comments regarding this report and the position that we find ourselves in today. Obviously, I'm sure we've all given this a great deal of thought, and it seems to me, and I'm speaking only for myself, that the task before us today is to chart a course forward and figure out where we go from here. Clearly, this is an important project. It is our main classroom building. It has been represented to us in the past that this building needs these improvements, and it has to be done. At the same time, that being said, based on the information that we now know, I submit that the question becomes, do we have confidence in CP to manage this project forward, to manage this project for us on a go-forward basis? What we now know is that the CP bid specifications had errors. They, for example, and I'm just quoting from, citing some of the exhibits, failed to account for certain contingencies. They failed to account for the customization of the windows. They failed to account for the fact that when you replace a window, there may be masonry damage, and that needs to be included in the estimate as well. There were comments, and Mr. Maderer made some reference to this in reasons why companies that picked up bid specifications did not choose to bid. There were some suggestions that the timeline was too aggressive. There were suggestions that contractors were not satisfied with signing a contract that had a liquidated damages provision. And so at the end of the day, and of course, this board was told, and albeit it was an estimate, we were told that the estimate for this project, which initially was $1.75 million, if I'm not mistaken, which grew to $2.1 million, ended up being just shy of $2.9 million, or $850,000 more than we had discussed. And that's not the only time that CP has given us an estimate that was not even close to what the price actually was. Because we were told that the Horton Mansion demolition would cost roughly $450,000, and it ended up costing us, we have received a bid at least, of less than $250,000. We now know of the relationships between trustees and the principals of CP. And I submit that it casts CP in a very different light than when we voted on the contract back in April of 2014, and when we awarded the contract to Echelon in May of 2014. And so to the extent that the question is CP right for us? Is CP the right firm to lead us through this project on our most important classroom building? I submit the answer to that question is no. Now, I gave very serious consideration, and in fact, I reached out to both President Mazur and Judge Parker to suggesting today that we do this whole process over, that we not sign the contract, and that we rebid this job. I gave that real consideration. The problem, as it was described to me, and I acknowledge both the judge's comments and Paul's comments, is if we rebid this project, of course, we have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in engineering fees. We lose at least 8 months of time, and we turn what is currently a 2-semester project into what would probably end up being a 3-semester project. That being said, it seems to me that when a public body is placed in a position like this, there needs to be some accountability and there need to be some changes. And so what I would offer for discussion and consideration by the board would be to terminate our relationship with CP, if not today, then in the very near future, and ask, submit, or advertise RFPs for an engineering firm to come in and take over where CP is today. I would ask each of the trustees to ask themselves this question. Do you have confidence in CP? CP, which told us that it was going to be $1.75 million, which grew to 2.1, which ended up being 2.9. Will that trend continue? if we continue with CP? And related to that, do we have the money? And I don't think we've actually had this discussion as a board. We're up to now roughly, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but between the cost for Echelon and the engineering fees, we're up to roughly $3.4 million. And we have not even started this project. And every project that I have done at my house, admittedly, turns out that there's change orders. And those change orders cost more money. And it seems to me that we're obligated as trustees of this college to ask that question, to have that discussion, and to satisfy ourselves that we have the money and that this is the engineering firm that we want to follow on our most important classroom building.
All right, is there any other discussion on the matter? Okay, we'll certainly take that into consideration. Shall we have a roll call vote as to the acknowledgement and receipt of the Saiber Report?
This will be action item number 4 for 4.2. Dr. Andrews?
Yes.
Mrs. Fox?
Yes.
Mrs. Geraci?
Geraci, yes.
Geraci. Mr. Leppert?
Abstain.
Judge Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Scanlon?
Yes.
Mrs. Yaskovic?
Yes.
Mr. Gavin?
In line with this situation.
All right, thank you. The one comment I want to make with respect to the report having been accepted by the board today is that when the college learned we had a problem, we took a very aggressive approach. We started with one law firm. When there were questions raised as to whether or not there might have been a conflict of interest with that law firm, we turned to yet another firm that we were certain did not have any conflicts of interest. The two firms that were utilized as conflict counsel by the board and by the administration were firms that had been interviewed the last time that we went out for counsel. So we had a very good idea of who the attorneys were, what their backgrounds were, and what their work was. So when we chose these firms, we did not just open the yellow pages and choose a law firm from the yellow pages. We chose firms that we had faith that they could, confidence and faith that they could render a report. The report here tonight indicates that the Porter Covert firm had rendered an unbiased and unconflicted report initially, but nevertheless, in our aggressive stance on dealing with these issues, we went that one step further. And we have gone still another step further. President Mazur has invited the Attorney General of New Jersey to review the report so that it can be still a further independent determination as to whether or not the report is fair and thorough, as personally I believe it is, and as to whether or not there was any wrongdoing such that has not been covered by the report. So we anticipate that now that the report has been accepted by the board and has been acknowledged, that the report will then be forwarded to the Attorney General for his review and his determination. And we have no idea how long that's going to take for him to render a report in that respect. But I wanted to be very clear that in this instance, when the problems became known to the board and to the administration, that a very aggressive approach was taken from the very beginning. And Dr. Mazur, in the interests of protecting the integrity of the college and also going forward on this Middle States evaluation, which is so important and integral to this issue, because the integrity of the college is at issue with Middle States as well, that Dr. Mazur took the necessary steps and he went forward and proceeded to have this investigation done. He proceeded to contact the Attorney General of New Jersey to have the matter reviewed. So having taken those positions, we just await that final outcome so that we will know once and for all that we can move on from this matter. and where we can go from here in order to proceed with the college, because in the end, it is the college and the students who matter. We as board members, we come and go, and it is not the board members who matter here as individuals. The board works as a concerted effort for the benefit of the college, and the only interest that any board member should have is the interests of the college. Having said that, is there any comment now? We are opening the floor to the public.
No,
Sorry, do you
just-
have a-
I agree with everything you said, but, so when you talk about the Attorney General, and I knew about that, but, is that now yet another thing that we have to wait to that to be concluded before we work the building? No, like, cause it seemed like we were waiting for this
Yes.
report.
That's
No.
right. And
Now we have this report, we decide what we're gonna do based on, everybody's thought process, based on Dan's input and others. But we're not gonna wait, we don't have to wait for that to be.
No.
We do not. We do not. All right, and with that, we're going to open the floor to the public, and I see Hank. Hank, I'm gonna ask you to stand by the microphone, the air conditioners
Which
are
means my butt will be in some.
noisy. Well, perhaps we can move the microphone. Would you state your name for the record,
Hank
please?
Pomerantz. It seems to me so out of character to be in concert with Mr. Perez. The two questions I did have to ask, he has explored somewhat. I too had looked at some of the records and found that we did not have a quorum for 2 votes. I wasn't asked about it, but I felt it was going to be picked up along the way. And obviously you have a way in which to deal with that if you choose to do that. My second question is, having read this report from cover to cover and have all kinds of turned down pages, some of the issues that came up, not all of which were articulated by your attorney, about why some of those bidders didn't bid. And a lot of them, to make it kind of simple, they were scared to bid. Not against Echelon, not against anything else, but because there's so many contingencies or possibilities that exist. And are we aware, and maybe I think Mr. Perez is kind of moving in that direction, are we aware of how many overruns this could possibly result in? So that is something I think you need to look at. Again, I have a 160-some-year-old home. I know when you start any project, the difficulty at times in what it's going to cost to do, or what changes you have to make. And I've seen some really wild estimates in my years of living in that home, 43 years of it. So the question comes up, is 288 right even? Because Echelon is saying we raised it up by, almost $800,000 because there's so many shaky possibilities. I don't mean shaky in a legal way, but just working on a building like that. I know just putting a water line, a simple water line into my house, a replacement, was an impossible chore. That took way more than anybody ever expected. The only thing that went well was digging the soil up. After that, it was just many, many, many other things that had to be done. So, I'm asking you to be careful. I know we need to move forward, and I've never been negative about moving forward with the new building. Having taught in that building, in a T-shirt, if I could even keep that much on when the heat was up, windows that have never opened, maybe opened a year or so after they came in, but no longer working windows today. Signs of don't do this and don't do that we've all had to kind of work around as a faculty here. So that, I think part of what Mr. Perez is suggesting is, do we need one more good look before you proceed? We've already delayed substantially. I can't imagine that we'll even possibly be ready for next fall semester with all the work that needs to be done and with all the possibilities of the additional work that has to be done. So I just offer my suggestion that you be cautious, that you prepare yourself for some possibilities, and that we definitely move forward, but we do it with great care. I'm usually the elephant in the room, so I'll take my seat and leave it.
Thank you, Hank. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm supposed to stand over here?
Yes, would you stand by the microphone, please?
Thank you.
Yeah, Harry Dunleavy is the name, and I worked here at the college for about 3 years. I don't know Professor or Dr. D. Hart. I was a calculus teacher in the main room, so I cannot question any of the things what the engineers are saying. But I found that the report, I found it just superficially loaded with prevarications and dichotomies. And I thought that there were 3 attorneys on the board before Mr. Perez came on. Tonight I've been told there were 4, which is correct, before Mr. Perez came on. Could I ask that? Oh, nobody wants to answer.
None of the attorneys on the board are the board's attorney.
I'm fully aware of that. I was a school board president, so I'm fully aware of that. But I would love to know why you got 3 law firms involved, and yet you have all these attorneys on here who are afraid to answer the question that I just asked.
No
I
one's
basically
afraid to answer the question, Mr. Dunleavy. The question was, I thought, answered by yourself. The fact of the matter is there are a number of attorneys on the board. Those attorneys, however, are not the board's attorney. The board has paid counsel who in fact was present during all of those votes that were taken that have to be retaken. So the board pays an attorney to represent the board.
Like we did when I was school board president.
Correct.
Correct. But I think it's a legitimate question to ask how many attorneys were on the board before Mr. Perez came on, because I know Mr. Perez personally, and you don't want to answer it, so that's okay.
Well, you know the answer. You stated it at the outset.
I don't know. I asked tonight, and I was told somebody, but I didn't know before that. And I want to know for sure.
3 attorneys on the board, and Mr. Perez makes the 4th attorney.
Right. Okay, so I didn't get the right information then tonight. Okay. The other question is, with all these attorneys, why did we have to go to the 3rd one? And I have some comment. I have in the past, actually, I have owned 2 apartment buildings, so I know a bit about what contractors will do and what they can't do. If you allow me to say, I had a simple job to be done, and the bids went from 15,000 to 9,000 to 7,000, and the 4th person came in and put his cameras down and said it was a minor job and said it would cost $500, and he did it the next day. The other thing is,
Perhaps you can give us his name and maybe we can look to him as
yes, I can do that, except that he lives in Florida.
Just our luck.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is, with Mr. Perez, first question I have to state is, on what Mr. Perez said, is the board should extricate themselves from that CP firm. Maybe they won't extricate themselves from the board, but at least I think they should try to do. The other thing is, I think a number of the board members should do the decent thing and they should resign. I find something else that was said tonight as a joke. I was here when Dr. Connor was here and the following president. And Dr. Mazur said that he found the thing in a difficult position when he took over. My research has found that the situation has deteriorated dramatically since Dr. Mazur took over. We were able to spend $300,000 on getting rid of a president who had a contract before that, and now we have spent, I think the figure tonight was $3.4 million without a thing being put in order, and yet poor people are going out to work at 5:30 every morning and they're paying taxes, and all that money can be wasted. And I think what we need is a few real board members who would really look into what's happening here and ameliorate the situation. How can that be done? I don't know. Another question I would have is the type of people that are being appointed to the board. I have no authority over that, but I think appointing people to a board that has never sat in a college or never taken a college course should not sit on a board of education. It would be unfair to criticize the attorney who did the report tonight until I have time to peruse it and cogitate it, but it seemed to me very questionable. And I wished some of the board members that they were connected with these firms, which is a whole phony thing. Mr. Colano picks up the thing, and it's from Mr. Brennan. You may be trying to fool people, but you're not going to fool people. And I don't know how the board realizes how sick the people are of this whole thing, which has been well reported by the Herald, which is where I get most of the information from. That's about all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Would you come forward, please, and state your name for the record?
yeah, sure. Seth Augenstein, reporter with the Star Ledger. I had 4 questions that were pretty specific about the report. Can I just shoot them
You
out
can
at
state them and we can determine whether they'll be answerable.
Okay, sure. First one is, from what you said up here earlier, it sounds like CP still debates the risks that entail the extra $850,000. I'd like to know if they are still holding to that.
Could you repeat it? I actually didn't hear the question.
Yeah, sure.
You say you believe CP still, and I didn't hear
Is CP still debating those risks that entail the $850,000 gap? I believe Mr. Nussbaum said that earlier in this room.
I think you may have misheard or misinterpreted. They're not debating anything. They thought they were reasonable adjustments when the bid came in, and when we spoke to the managing director of CP, I think Rob said for about 3 hours in this room, he felt comfortable that the revisions, if you will, or the considerations, I should say, that Echelon took were reasonable. We then had our outside engineer review them again, and he concluded that they were also reasonable in light of the risks, because it's such an old building and there are certain unknowns that are involved. So it was no difference of opinion between CP and our engineer
I
in that
must have
regard.
misheard Mr. Nussbaum.
Yeah, I think it was.
So, fair enough. It was outlined in the report specific payments for 2 of the 3 trustees. It was $13,000, I believe, for Vetrano, and then $2,000 with another contract pending for Mr. Lepper. Was there anything specified in Gavin's arrangement as the attorney for CP?
There were certain, well, he rented space from a affiliated company of CP. My recollection is he voted on one matter before that arrangement took place. He abstained on all subsequent matters. And since then, he has provided, we understand, certain legal services to CP, but he abstained on all those votes. His vote was not counted.
So numbers don't apply because it was all after the vote was taken?
Based on the, well, they don't apply in the sense that, they are what they are, but it did not affect any of the voter consideration because he did not vote.
Okay.
I'd just like to clarify one thing you said.
Sure.
There is no contract between my firm, any firm I'm affiliated with, and CP.
Okay, it was the potential proposal, I guess, back in June, which is...
The proposal that was made. Right?
It's null and void at this point?
There's no contract, and no action.
Okay. One other point, actually 2 other points.
You said 4, so we're down to 2.
Yes, we're down to 2, so this is the penultimate point.
I took college math.
That's okay. There you go. It was mentioned in the report that John Urson, the college counsel, gave Mr. Leppard advice that he did not have a conflict. Was that sound advice? Would that be your advice?
I think he gave, as I understand, he gave Mr. Leppard advice and then left it up to Mr. Leppard based upon that advice to determine whether he had or did not have. And Mr. Leppard determined that he did not have a conflict. I would say that under our new proposed policy, which has not been adopted by the board as of this point, that that advice probably would have been inadequate in that Mr. Leppard would have been required to disclose the relationship formally to the board. Although that relationship was known by a number of people here, I don't believe Mr. Leopard in any way intended or in fact did keep it a secret from anybody.
Yeah,
Is that,
yeah.
I can clarify that a little more.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Leopard, could you speak up, please?
Sure,
so
sure.
I can hear? Thanks.
I disagree slightly with Mr. Mader in that when I approached Mr. Urson after 2 abstentions, I laid out the facts as I knew them and told him my opinion was that I was not conflicted because of a minor relationship with a firm I'm involved with in which I'm absentee as far as client service goes. I also had no other relationship with CP, social, professional, or anything like that. And I took Mr. Urson's response to be an opinion, that he agreed.
Yeah, that's what I thought came through in the report. Just the last question too, is the way it was worded at the end, it said something along the lines of the 3 trustees were unaware of their due diligence. That wasn't the term, but how they were unaware of their responsibilities owing to New Jersey law and the college's ethical code. Does that mean laws were broken?
I'm not suggesting laws were broken. I think there has to be a new policy adopted, and I think the board members should be appropriately educated on what that policy is. And I think there was some confusion or lack of knowledge as to what the obligations were. Some people, like Mr. Gavin, abstained from voting, and he, I thought, in good faith, thought that was an appropriate response to the relationship. And perhaps another way to handle it would have been to let everybody know why he was abstaining, which is part of the new policy, as opposed to just abstaining. But I think there could be legitimately some confusion as to what those obligations were. I'm not suggesting any laws were broken.
It's a gray area then.
I think at the time these votes were taken, for that board, with the present policy, it could be considered a gray area.
Yeah, that's it. That's my point.
It should be noted also that the abstentions and the practices that occurred during this whole episode were in fact the practices that had been in place at the college for many, many years. In other words, that if somebody had a conflict, they abstained. They didn't necessarily state why they had a conflict, but that was the practice for many, many years, long before all of us came onto this board. So it's not something that just came up out of the blue in this particular instance that these board members failed to disclose. But that had been the practice on this board for many, many years. And I think it's important to realize that. It's also important to realize that right now the policy committee is undertaking a very extensive review of the policy. We had asked Mr. Mader to give us a proposed policy. He has done that. We're taking that into consideration. We have done a tremendous amount of work on the policy, the code of ethics. In fact, between Dr. Mazur and myself, we contacted every single community college in the state of New Jersey, all 19, and we collected their policies, and it turns out that 15, I believe, of the 19, I don't have the papers in front of me, 15 of the 19 colleges have exactly the same policy we have, and implemented it in the same way that we did. A few colleges had different, 2 colleges have no policy at all, ethics policy at all. So it was not a haphazard adoption of a policy. It was the sample policy that was utilized by the community colleges at the time it was adopted. And I think it's important to realize that this was a long-term practice here at the college to simply abstain from the vote rather than to state a specific conflict of interest. I think it has become clear to us at this point that that needs to change. And I don't think there is any dispute by any of the individuals on this board, and certainly not the 3 individuals involved, that those changes need to be adopted and adopted soon. And they are going to be presented to the board at our September meeting.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just wanted
Hold
to
on
be
just a moment.
really-
We have a,
Oh, I just want to say thank
Hank,
you.
you've had a shot, so let me just see if other people who have not had an opportunity. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? Kevin?
May I?
Yes.
Thank you.
Kevin is our student alumni member of the board. He is a non-voting member of the board.
I just have a couple questions in regards to the issue at hand. Correct me if I'm wrong, CP is the engineering company. They're the ones that we get the quote from. we sent out, or 14 packages were picked up, and only one bid came in, which was, how do you pronounce it? Echelon?
Echelon.
Echelon. Echelon came in at 2.9, I believe, Mr. Perez stated, correct?
2.88.
2.88. Mr. Perez's suggestion was to possibly see if we want to restart from the beginning. But as the attorney stated before, and by that I mean the attorneys that we outsource, Echelon, it would be the burden of proof on them if they wanted to go and sue us, for lack of better terms. With also the suggestions of the law firm, after they've interviewed many, many hours, have brought in another outside contractor, and they said Echelon's bid was pretty accurate. As a student, and somebody that's not very intelligent as far as everybody else here with all your masters and my simple associates, I wouldn't start all over. That's just me. Because then not only will we have to start all over, as I just said, we also are now looking at, as they stated, a very large loss if Echelon is able to prove the amount of other jobs that they've lost profit on. That's just what I wanted to say. Because I don't like starting over from the beginning. That's just me. And I respect what everybody said, and I know I'm actually enjoying this. And I want to add this one part, since Judge Parker, you said this is all about the students, it might be a good refresher for everybody to realize how many students do like coming here, and since I'm all about the students, Wednesday would be a good opportunity for everybody to see what the students here that come here are all about, and the amount of volunteers that the students come, because it is orientation day. And you're going to see how many current students are stepping up to really put a positive image on the construction that's happening. And they're not informed as much as everybody in the room is of the progress, but yet they're still fighting for the college, but they don't know what they're fighting for. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there anyone else who wishes to make a comment from the public?
I'll make a short one if you're done.
Excuse me, Mr.
But
Dunleavy, you've had an opportunity.
I will
Let's just
wait.
see if there's anyone else.
Just that I failed to say thank you to all of you for your openness and sharing with us, to President Major, who has moved us through this process. You know how I feel about you as a board. I've always been very complimentary, and this serves to let us know that you will keep the doors open for all of us to come in, to share, and thank you for that. And boy, this is a hell of a week. I haven't gone through the other stuff yet.
Thank you, Hank. Is there anyone else? Mr. Dunleavy? Briefly, please.
I also want to thank the board for allowing me to speak, even though I can be a little bit rough at times and critical. I have just a question. It's been brought to my attention that there are only night classes during the summer, and that the college is closed after 5 p.m. during the regular season, and that hundreds, if not over 1,000, who work in Morris County are going to Morris County College. But my question is it true that it is closed during the 2 regular seasons after 5 p.m., or are there regular classes?
I'll defer to Bill, but we have regular classes in the evening. We do have evening classes here. We do not close at 5. The college,
Classes are regularly scheduled to 9, 10, or in some cases, 10 o'clock.
to 10 o'clock. We have classes scheduled for 10 o'clock.
Thank you. Libraries open evening hours.
Counseling's open, yeah.
Okay, the one other comment that I want to make before we close here is that our board members are volunteers. We volunteer many, many hours of our time. We're not paid for our services. It doesn't make any difference if we had 11 attorneys on the board. We're not attorneys paid to represent the board or paid to give legal advice to the board. We try to separate ourselves from our legal backgrounds because that's not our role here. We employ an attorney to advise the board, and we had an attorney through all of this who was to be advising the board. But nevertheless, I think it is important for the public to understand that we're not just here on any kind of a paid basis. There have been situations that arose here that have been disclosed. They are unfortunate situations. People make mistakes. There's no question about that. It would be wonderful if we were all perfect. We're not. People make mistakes. Some mistakes were made here. That doesn't diminish the work that this board does on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month basis. Nor does it diminish the work that the administration does on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. You've heard me, those of you who are here, and there's so many of you who come to all of our meetings, you've heard me say over and over again how hard Paul and Frank have worked and how much dedication over the last 4 years. Paul Mazur has in fact given his heart and soul to this college over the last 4 years to bring it back from the brink. We were turning a corner, and we hope to continue to turn that corner. We've had some issues. Clearly there are problems. We are addressing them. We have addressed them as aggressively as we could possibly do. Asking the Attorney General to come in and to review the situation has to be about as bold a move as President Mazur could have made in terms of clearing the air, clearing the college, starting fresh. We start in September with a new semester. We have the report behind us. We have to take certain actions, and we will take into consideration the suggestions that have been made. We will have further discussions, and we will deal with those situations as they arise. But please remember that the people who sit around this table are not paid employees of the state or the college. They're volunteers. They're people who have families. They're people who have jobs. There are people who have every other obligation in their lives that everyone does. But they come here and they volunteer their time for the students, for Sussex County College, to provide an education to students who might not otherwise have it. Having said that, is there anything further that anyone wishes to add? Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Frank Warr. I'm principal of HQW Architects. We've worked in this county for 43 years. And I'm a little concerned about the lightness that is given to the ethics considerations for this board. I was asked on 2 separate occasions by Mr. Vetrano to serve on this board, which I dearly would have liked to have done. On the first occasion, I said, I work for the county college. Do you think it's appropriate? And he says, I don't know. You'll have to ask John Eskelson, which I did. And John said, if you can ask the question, you can consider yourself in conflict. The second time, I did the same thing. I thought perhaps there was some other caveat to this. It was the same answer from John Eskelson, that if you can ask the question, if there's a conflict, there's a conflict. I also serve on the board, the YMCA board at Sussex County. I was the chairman of the board. Before I joined the board, I asked members of the board if I did work for the Sussex County Y or the Metro YMCA, the Oranges, would there be a conflict if I worked for them, which I do. I worked on many occasions with the Y, still do, and am. We have a policy, a very simple policy, that every board member answers this question: do you have a conflict? What is it? And how much is it? And how much are you paid? And what is your relationship? I would ask this board to ask themselves much more carefully, and the attorneys, if we are facing conflicts that are not being addressed.
Mr. Warr, I can assure you we are not taking the conflict issue lightly. We are taking it very seriously. The matter is being addressed very carefully, and it is being addressed aggressively, as I had said previously. I want to thank the people who have made their comments and contributions here today, and I am going to ask for a motion to close the public session. So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, the next regular business meeting for the Board of Trustees will be Monday, September 22nd at 5 p.m. in this room. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.